Hello, I'm Stephen Fagin, curator of the 6th Floor Museum at Dealey Plaza, and welcome to another installment of a series we're calling Interrogating Art that supports our special exhibit, Art Reframes History, here at the 6th Floor Museum. And today I'm here with an award-winning local fine art photographer, Dr. Paul Sokal. Thank you so much for joining us to talk about one of these extraordinary pieces that make up this special exhibit.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
This is called 21 November. Give us a sense of what we're looking at here.
Well, this project was inspired by the question, what is it like the night before you plan to kill the President of the United States? And the way I constructed this, it's not specific to Oswald. It's simply to get the viewer to think about what is going through the mind of an assassin the night before.
This is a triptych. It's three nearly identical photographs, but the longer you stare at it, the more differences begin to emerge. It's quite a unique piece. What inspired this? Was there some aspect of this photograph that first came to mind?
Well, I actually started with the TV. I have a fascination with the mid-century period I grew up in, and I have a real affection for the artifacts of that time period. And I found the TV at one of my favorite junk shops, and I wasn't sure why I needed it. I just knew I did need it. And so I brought it home and waited for it to inspire me. And I thought about what was the greatest TV event of my childhood when this TV would have been in use, and it was clearly the assassination of John F. Kennedy. So that's what really started the ball rolling. And I wanted to create a piece, like I said, that would inspire the viewer to think about something we don't normally talk about or think about. What's it actually like to be inside the mind of Harvey Oswald, Lee Harvey Oswald, or others, shooters, if there were multiple shooters. So there aren't specific references in here to Oswald because I didn't want to make it specific to him.
Now, how old were you in 1963?
I was 10.
Okay.
Yeah.
Give us a little sense of what that day, that weekend was like for you as a child.
Well, I remember the actual assassination. We were at I believe, and I worked this out, I think I was in 6th grade at the time, but we were up at the high school for a special dance performance. I think it was a ballet performance. And in the middle of the performance, a teacher came out, said the president's been shot, you're all going home. So we were trucked back to the grammar school where I lived and then went home. My mother was a Democrat and a Kennedy fan, and of course she was very upset when I got home. And we were drawn to the TV.
A TV just like this one?
Well, it wasn't exactly like this one, but of a similar vintage. And we only had the one black and white TV in our house. And so that whole weekend was about, watching the events of the assassination and everything surrounding that. We finally had enough and turned the TV off, still had the radio on. So we actually heard of Oswald's murder on the radio. We weren't watching the TV when Ruby shot him.
And this was a moment which, in your opinion, defined your generation, the Kennedy assassination?
Well, it certainly, I think it's probably the first big event, given my age, that I, was really aware of what was going on. Yeah. Have you always wanted to do something with the assassination? No, not really.
Okay.
I moved to Dallas in '78, and so that was when I first saw Dealey Plaza. And I remember when this museum was being formulated, and first time I came here to actually, look out the window. Mm-hmm. And those were important experiences tying back to, to my childhood.
Earlier you mentioned Oswald or others. So you really, with this piece, don't take a position on whether it was one person or a conspiracy.
I don't. Yeah.
You give us some clues to suggest maybe possible conspiracy theories. I call them Easter eggs that you kind of put in the different pictures. Let's take a deeper dive and look at this. So what we're looking at here is essentially the night before the assassination, starting on the left, and then we see that time progresses. We can see the clock on the wall. We can see more cigarettes in the ashtray. We can see the bourbon starts to decrease. Did you do that personally to make sure?
I didn't drink it.
Okay. But we definitely see a passage of time here, and there's a buildup. It's really interesting. I mean, everything's the same. The furniture's the same. There's nothing really truly different that stands out, and yet there's an intensity that kind of builds over the course of these three photographs. How did you achieve that? How did you build up this sense of anticipation, of intensity across three similar photographs?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was spent several months collecting a lot of the items in the photographs, particularly the magazines, things like this matchbook cover, cigarettes, the vintage liquor bottle. The books in the background, which are a little bit difficult to see, are actually books that were bestsellers from that time period.
James Bond novels,
yeah.
Which both Kennedy and Oswald were known to have read.
Right. But the real thing that I want the viewer to read are the magazines as they progress. And in the first one, we see a story about Vietnam. But down here is another Life magazine describing the influence of Kennedy in Central America and trying to create an economic firewall against Castro, bringing in the notion of, did Cuba have something to do with this?
Right.
And you'll see in the shadow, when you look closely, there's a gun annual magazine. Here we have a True Police Case magazine with a story about Bobby Kennedy and laws that he got passed to make it easier to investigate and arrest organized crime, bringing up the question of, did organized crime have something to do with the assassination?
You're really hitting on all the usual suspects.
Right.
You've got Vietnam, you've got Cuba, you've got the mob, but you really have to pay attention to the details in order to pick up the subtleties in these different magazines, because in some cases it's not the cover story, but it's a little subheading maybe at the very bottom.
Right. And then as we move on, this again is from the gun annual, The Thrill of the Long Kill. And if you weren't really tied into it, of course, being in this museum, you will be, but you start to see dates on the magazines that tell us what time it is.
Yeah, I see you wait till the very end for this Life magazine that actually says November 22nd, 1963. Right. Hanging off the edge just enough so that the date is very prominent. Because, of course, were this not displayed here at the site of the assassination, the viewer might not necessarily appreciate what they're looking at until they come to the last photograph here.
Yeah. And so and then of course in the last image, in the second image, you see a shadow of a head.
Yeah, right here. Is that your head?
That is my head.
Okay. Looked like it.
And then in the last image, you see a shadow of a gun.
Now, how did you achieve that?
Well, I had shot this with a couple of what are called V-flats, basically large pieces of foam core to create this column of light coming in as though it were a doorway or a hallway, spilling light into this room, and then just standing in that column of light.
With a rifle?
With a rifle,
okay.
Right.
Wow. Now, how long did it take you to put the set together to make these three different photographs?
The whole process, was probably 6 months. I did it, each shooting these three photographs, maybe an hour, but I had to do it several times to really get it the way I wanted it.
Just to point out your attention to detail, these magazines, of course, You did this in 2018. These magazines are 55 years old that we're looking at, and yet they look like they were just purchased off the newsstand. How do you make 55-year-old, because these are authentic magazines, how do you make 55-year-old magazines look brand new?
That was really the greatest challenge of doing this. Some of it, certainly the fading and some of the discoloration, you can handle with Photoshop in post-processing. But the biggest challenge was restoring the edges of the pages, because even magazines that were in good shape, the edges are sort of frayed, they're fuzzy. And I couldn't, personally, I didn't have anything that I could use to do that. And so I went to my framer and asked, because I knew she had a huge blade that they used to cut matte papers, matte boards, that if they would be able to cut the edges off the magazines. And I just wanted to take off like 1/8 of an inch, and they were able to do it. So that restored nice sharp edges to the magazines like they just come off the newsstand.
Wow. That is a lot of work and effort for something that looks so effortless in the final analysis.
Thank you.
How do you feel? This is a departure from your regular work, isn't it?
Right. Yes.
How do you feel about how it all turned out in the end?
Well, I mean, I'm pleased with the way it came out. Like I said, it's kind of a unique piece. And when I first showed it to a gallery owner who's exhibited some of my work in the past, he wasn't really sure what to make of it. And, you know, he's obviously a photography expert. And so he finally said, you ought to talk to the Sixth Floor Museum. And that's how I first reached out to Lindsay Richardson, and then, the rest is history, as they say.
And here it is.
So I'm quite thrilled to be part of this exhibit. I think with the advent of the internet and Instagram and everything, photography has become sort of a commodity. And I think Ansel Adams described the difference between painting and photography, that he said painting was synthetic and that the artist synthesized the image, whereas photography, the photographer was analytic, and he captured part of something that already existed. Well, I think photography is sort of going back into a synthetic mode, because a lot of the beautiful scenes that we would capture in landscape photography, for instance, stuff that I really enjoy doing, but it's all over the internet. Again, it has no value. So now I feel, to be a serious artist, you really have to go back to creating something like this. One of my photography heroes, Gregory Crewdson, is the sort of the master of doing this. And he just creates a movie in a single frame, and actually spends months, creating the images. They actually use movie lighting to light the images. So he's sort of an artistic inspiration for me. Thinking
back to your childhood memories of the assassination, watching it play out on television, was this process in any way cathartic or therapeutic for you?
I think it made me focus again on, aspects of the assassination that I never really heard talked about. It was a monstrous act, but whoever did it was a human being. And how do we process that as a human, that you're actually about to kill the most important person in the world?
When you created this, were you thinking primarily of an audience that was alive like you were at the time of the assassination? Or were you thinking that this would be an interesting introduction to the event to people that were not alive at the time?
Both, but maybe focused on people who weren't alive to get them to think about it. I did another project on mid-century artifacts, and it was exhibited at another museum. And a lot of the fun for me was watching people my age look at the images, and they go, "Oh, we used to have one of those." And then kids would come along and they go, "What the heck is that?"
What's a magazine? Yeah. What's a television?
Yeah, so I think inspiring people who weren't alive during the assassination to think again what all of the different theories were around what happened.
Right. Well, this will be on display as part of this exhibit, Art Reframes History, through spring of 2021. So a lot of people, both rememberers and non-rememberers, will have an opportunity to see this and sort of explore the buildup of intensity the night before the assassination. What an extraordinary work. Thank you so much for sharing it with us.
Yeah,
we
thanks for
appreciate it.
exhibiting it.
I hope you'll tune in for our next installment of Interrogating Art. Our CEO, Nicola Longford, will be in conversation with Charles Wiley from the Santa Barbara Museum of Art. So join us here next time. Thank you very much.